Hello, my name is Savannah Mirabal, and today I'm going to be talking about the problem of horrendous natural evil. And essentially, the question that stems along with this is, why does the good, all-powerful, all-knowing God allow bad things that does not stem essentially from human agency to affect his treasured creatures? And I'm going to be talking about a couple perspectives in this video, so tag along. Alright, so the first person I'm going to be talking about today is no other than Kate Bowler. So, from her perspective, our culture often promotes the idea that one can think or behave their way out of tragedy, suggesting that life's difficulties can be avoided with the right formula. However, Bowler firmly rejects this notion, insisting that life is fundamentally unpredictable and that there is no perfect set of rules to protect against suffering. The difficult truth, brought into sharp focus by her cancer diagnosis, is that bodies are delicate and prone to err, and ultimately that bodies fail. This reality stands in stark opposition to the prosperity gospel, which promises a guarantee to follow these rules and God will reward you, heal you, and restore you. Bowler argues that this belief system is dangerous and unrealistic because it forces people to believe that if there are suffering, is a sign of moral and personal failure. Similarly, the impulse to rationalize pain by claiming everything happens for a reason is often deeply harmful. She finds that one of the most endearing and saddest things about being sick is watching people's attempts to make sense of your problem. Ultimately, illness stripped away her illusions of control, offering a more honest and vivid view of existence, one that acknowledged that life is so beautiful, life is so hard. The takeaway is that acceptance of a complex life, not the pursuit of a guaranteed perfect one. Pretty much, she believes, that God doesn't guarantee safety, God doesn't promise success, but God can be present even when life falls apart. Alright, so the second perspective that we are going to look into is the perspective of David Hart. So Hart believes that when innocent people die, it's not because God planned it or wanted it. Suffering and death have no divine purpose and reveal not the face of God, but the face of God's enemy. So God's role is to rescue creation from suffering, not to use it. So the argument presented firmly rejects the idea that suffering and death serve a divine purpose, or should ever be explained as part of God's intention, urging Christians to dismiss the notion that disasters are meaningful in themselves. This is based on the premise that God is infinitely sufficient in himself and had no need to use sin and death to manifest his glory or achieve perfect union with his creatures. Consequently, when witnessing heartbreaking tragedies such as the death of a child, one is not seeing the will of God but rather the face of his enemy, because death is what God is actively fighting against, not causing. So instead, God's purpose is to rescue his creation from the absurdity of sin and the emptiness of death by acting to heal and restore what is broken. This teaching acknowledges that the world is currently in a state of spiritual struggle, which is why innocent people suffer, but it anchors Christians' hope in the premise of a future day when God will end the struggle, ensuring that there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, nor any more pain. So looking into our last perspective, we have C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis believes that pain has a purpose in shaping a person's character and relationship with God. He argues that pain wakes people up from spiritual numbness and forces them to pay attention to what truly matters. Even though suffering feels harsh, Lewis thinks God allows it because it pushes humans to surrender their pride, to seek him, and to grow morally and spiritually. So ultimately, Lewis sees pain not as cruelty, but as a difficult form of love. So with that being said, he argues that pain forces people to pay attention to God, serving as a difficult but necessary catalyst that shakes humanity out of spiritual forgetfulness. He famously states that while God whispers to us in our pleasure and speaks in our conscience, he shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. From this perspective, God's ultimate goal is not to grant an easy life, but to shape us into people capable of truly loving him, a process that often requires pain. Lewis views humanity not merely as imperfect creatures who must be improved, but as rebels who must lay down our arms, making suffering the tool God uses to scrub away selfishness and reshape character. The human will, he suggests, will not even begin to try to surrender self-will as long as it seems to be well with it, meaning suffering is essential to break down self-resilience, Furthermore, suffering makes humans intensely long for God, for heaven, and for something permanent beyond the temporary pleasure of earthly life. Our Father refuses us on the journey with some pleasant ends, but will not encourage us to mistake them for home. So now that we have looked at all three perspectives of each person, we are going to look and point out the difference in agreements in each perspective. So, starting off with similarities. So, despite their different conclusions about the origin or purpose of pain, all three thinkers fundamentally agree that suffering is an unavoidable part of the human experience, regardless of one's level of faith or moral conduct. They all believe that suffering serves to expose humans' vulnerability, forcing us to confront a reality that is far more complex than we prefer to acknowledge. For Lewis, this exposure is a necessary shock as a pain wakes us up to our desperate need for God by shattering our spiritual deafness. For Bowler, suffering is a stripping process that rips away our deeply held illusions of control and perfection, and for Hart, the encounter with horrendous natural evil like tsunamis or cancer reveals the depth of how truly broken and absurd the world currently is. So finally, though, they debate why gods permit suffering. They share the profound theological conviction that God is present in some way with his treasured creatures during the struggle, whether as the one who shouts to us is the one who sustains us through the chaos, or the one who fights the enemies alongside us. Now, looking at the differences, the thinkers diverge significantly on what suffering reveals about God and whether it is a part of his intention. For C.S. Lewis, suffering reveals that God is good, but that he must sometimes shout in our pain because humanity is deafened by comfort. Thus, pain serves as a megaphone to rouse a deaf world. His answer to whether suffering is part of God's plan is a qualified yes. God allows it to shape us, strip away our self-will, and call us back to him. In contrast, Kate Bowler argues that suffering reveals that God is not a vending machine, and faith offers no guarantee of protection from tragedy. For her, the answer to the divine plan question is a strong no. Suffering is random and arises because bodies are delicate and prone to error, and that is set by God. Finally, David Hart holds that suffering reveals that God is pure love, and therefore the suffering is never his will. In fact, tragedy reveals the face of his enemy, and for Hart, the answer is an absolute no. God never wills evil, but rather fights against it and promises to undo all evil completely in the end. Alright, so to end this video, I'm going to lastly look at my own stance. So after engaging with these three distinct voices, I find myself agreeing most strongly with the perspective put forth by C.S. Lewis. His view aligns directly with my personal belief that painful experiences can lead to profound and lasting growth. Lewis argues that suffering is not pointless, but acts as a God's megaphone to rouse the deaf world, capable of shaping our character and drawing us closer to what is truly good. I believe that painful experiences are essential for us to become stronger and more compassionate people. Consequently, I must respectfully disagree with David Hart that suffering is entirely connected to God's will. While I agree with Hart that God is love and that his ultimate purpose is restoration, I believe that God allows and perhaps even causes suffering as part of a larger plan. While it is undeniably painful and often feels unfair, I maintain that God permits natural evils to shape us, to strengthen our character, to ultimately lead us away from our spiritual deafness and toward genuine surrender to him. Thank you.